the man who thought he controlled every room could predict his own downfall, why would he make the one move that would destroy everything? Right in front of the world's eyes. The Rosemont Hotel had never seen anything like it. The night of the annual Spring Hearts Gala was supposed to be about charity, champagne, and harmless gossip. But that night, all anyone could talk about was the spectacle that unfolded beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers. There are nights in every city when the whole world seems to be watching. And for the city's elite, this was one of those nights. Limousines lined the street, velvet ropes held back the eager press, and inside the air buzzed with nervous energy. Evan Porter, who used to be a rising star in the tech world, stood at the center of it all, hungry for attention. He was in his element, dressed in a sharp navy tuxedo, hairstyled with just the right amount of casual arrogance, his every gesture dripping with the confidence of a man who believed the world owed him an audience. On his arm was his latest conquest, Stella Ray, a stunning young model barely old enough to order her own champagne, who seemed to think every camera flash was for her alone. They were both here to be seen, and Evan was determined to make sure the spotlight never left him. The crowd, made up of CEOs, actors, city politicians, and old money, milled around the ballroom, whispering as Evan made his rounds. But Evan's bravado hid an ugly truth. Just a year before, he'd been married to Eliza Porter, a woman as different from Stella as the moon from the sun. Eliza, who had once been the anchor of Evan's world, was now the subject of his cruelest jokes. Their divorce, splashed across the tabloids, had left Eliza vulnerable and alone. Evan, meanwhile, used every opportunity to paint himself as the victim, claiming Eliza was clingy, boring, and worst of all, a gold digger who got lucky. Nobody dared correct him, but everyone knew. Eliza was never after Evan's money. She just wanted a family, a home, and maybe a little bit of love. As the night wore on, Evan grew bolder. He'd had too much to drink, and the more he drank, the louder he got. Stella giggled at every joke, encouraging him to go further. "You're hilarious, babe," she cooed, her hand squeezing his arm, eyes scanning the room for the next camera. It was all a performance, a show designed to humiliate, to prove he was still in control. And then, just when Evan seemed at his most untouchable, the ballroom doors swung open. It was like a scene from a movie. Every head turned as Eliza entered, her figure silhouetted against the bright lobby lights. She was visibly pregnant, her posture straight, chin high, face serene. She wore a simple navy gown that accentuated her baby bump, and although she wasn't draped in diamonds, she radiated something far more valuable: quiet dignity. On her arm was a man few recognized at first, but those who did went silent. Gabriel West, the billionaire investor known for his genius and his privacy. Rumors had always swirled around Gabriel, but no one had ever seen him at an event like this, let alone on the arm of someone like Eliza Porter. Suddenly, every eye in the ballroom was fixed on them. Eliza didn't flinch. She moved through the room with calm grace, Gabriel at her side, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. If she noticed Evan, she gave no sign. The effect was electric. Whispers rose in waves. "Is that really Gabriel West? Eliza Porter pregnant? What is she doing here?" Evan's jaw tightened. He watched, lips curled in a sneer, as the woman he'd once dismissed as forgettable became the center of attention. He couldn't stand it, not after all he'd done to move on, to erase her from his story. "Unbelievable," he muttered to Stella, loud enough for those around to hear. "Look who dragged herself in. Figures she'd show up now that I'm finally happy." The MC called for quiet as the auction began, but the tension was palpable. Evan seized the moment. As soon as the room settled, he strode up to the microphone, his arms still locked with Stella's. He cleared his throat, his voice echoing across the marble floor. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to make a little toast. Some people say success is the best revenge, but I say, sometimes revenge is just showing up with an upgrade." His eyes locked on Eliza, and he smiled, cruel and sharp. Some guests laughed, awkward, unsure. Others looked away, embarrassed for Eliza, unsure what to do. Evan wasn't finished. "I mean, look at me," he crowed. "Life is good. I've got my health, my company, my future, my freedom." He squeezed Stella's waist, and she leaned into him, milking the attention. "And as for exes, well, sometimes they move on, sometimes they move up, but sometimes, let's be real, they just move sideways. Isn't that right, Gabriel?" The insult hung in the air. Gabriel West met Evan's eyes with a cool, measured stare, unfazed. Eliza didn't blink. She stood tall, refusing to let Evan's words land, but the damage was done. The cameras clicked, cell phones recorded, and the entire ballroom buzzed with excitement, horror, and the unmistakable scent of a story too juicy to ignore. What no one knew was that this was not the night Evan would win. In fact, it was the night his whole world would begin to unravel. The public humiliation he had just inflicted was about to rebound in ways he could never have predicted. All it would take was one day, a single, earth-shattering day, to turn Evan's victory into the kind of defeat people would talk about for years. He thought he could control the story. He thought he could humiliate Eliza and walk away with everything he ever wanted. He was wrong. Because in less than 24 hours, Evan Porter would lose everything. His job, his lover, his reputation, and the last remnants of the world he thought he ruled. All because he underestimated the one woman who knew how to rise from the ashes, and the billionaire who stood quietly at her side. From the outside, Eliza Porter was not the sort of woman you'd expect to headline a citywide scandal. She never craved attention. She didn't come from old money, didn't boast a designer wardrobe, and didn't chase the trappings of high society. Her beauty was quiet, never loud, soft hazel eyes, a warm, steady smile, and hair she usually tied back in a simple ponytail while teaching elementary school. To the world, she was just another hard-working woman making ends meet, someone polite but easy to overlook. But beneath that unassuming surface was a resilience forged in fire, and a heart that refused to break, no matter how hard life tried. Eliza was born in a tiny two-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the city's rougher side. Her mother, Cynthia Harper, worked double shifts as a waitress after Eliza's father walked out when she was 6. Money was always tight, and luxuries were the stuff of other people's lives. But Cynthia raised her daughter to believe that character, not circumstance, was what mattered most. "Never let anyone tell you what you're worth, Ellie," she would say on the nights they ate ramen by candlelight when the power was cut off again. "You get to decide who you become." Those words became Eliza's compass, guiding her through every storm. She was the first in her family to graduate high school, winning scholarships and working part-time as a library assistant just to pay for books. She attended a state college where she juggled 3 jobs, waitressing, babysitting, and tutoring, while keeping a GPA high enough to keep her financial aid. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was hers. Eliza never forgot the struggles her mother endured for her, and she promised herself that one day she'd build a life where she could rest easy. She found solace in teaching, discovering she had a gift for connecting with children who, like her, needed someone to believe in them. Her classroom was a haven, filled with laughter, safety, and the promise that anyone could rise above their circumstances. Her colleagues admired her compassion, though some thought she was naive for always giving people second chances. The truth was, Eliza knew what it felt like to be written off, and she refused to become hardened by life's disappointments. Evan Porter entered her world like a whirlwind during her second year as a teacher. He was charismatic, confident, and ambitious, a far cry from the shy boys she'd grown up around. He saw something in Eliza that no one else seemed to, and for the first time, she felt truly special. Their first dates were simple: coffee at a bookshop, walks in the park, take-out dinners while binge-watching old movies. Evan made her laugh and made big promises about the future. He was in tech, always talking about the next big thing, the app that would change the world. Eliza didn't care about any of that. She just wanted to build a family, the kind she never had. They married in a modest backyard ceremony, surrounded by friends, students, and her mother's tears of pride. For a while, life seemed almost perfect. But as Evan's career began to take off, cracks appeared. He became restless, chasing the next deal, the next party, the next validation. He started complaining about Eliza's lack of ambition, her boring job, and her refusal to play the high society wife. "Why don't you dress up more?" he'd snap before a work event. "You make me look like I'm married beneath me." Eliza tried to keep the peace, swallowing her hurt, believing that if she was just a little more patient, Evan would come back to her. It was during these difficult months that Eliza learned she was pregnant. She'd always wanted children, but when she told Evan, his reaction was ice cold. A baby? Now? Do you have any idea how busy I am? He snapped, accusing her of trying to trap him. Still, Eliza pressed on, clinging to hope, determined to give her child the loving home she never had. But as her belly grew, Evan drifted further away, working late, traveling more, spending weekends with colleagues she'd never met. The final straw came the night he came home reeking of perfume, his tie askew, refusing to meet her eyes. The divorce was ugly, and Evan's lawyers were ruthless. He painted Eliza as unstable, lazy, and greedy, despite the fact that she'd supported him through his early failures and asked for nothing but respect. She signed the papers alone in her tiny apartment, her hands trembling, her heart shattered. She wondered how she'd ever recover, especially now that she was carrying their child. For weeks, she kept her head down, teaching her students, ignoring the cruel headlines and whispers at the grocery store. But in the darkness, something inside her hardened. She realized she was done apologizing for being not enough. She was done letting anyone decide her value. Her life took an unexpected turn when she volunteered at a literacy charity, hoping to distract herself from the pain. That's where she met Gabriel West, a man whose wealth and reputation were legendary, but whose eyes were kind, not cold. He donated millions quietly, preferring to help from the shadows, but when he saw Eliza reading to children at the shelter, he introduced himself. Unlike Evan, Gabriel never made her feel small. He asked about her dreams, not her dress size. He listened to her story without judgment. Their friendship blossomed into something deeper, a slow, steady warmth that reignited her belief in love. For the first time, Eliza allowed herself to hope that her story could still have a happy ending. By the time the Rosemont Gala arrived, Eliza was a different woman than the one who'd married Evan. She'd survived heartbreak, humiliation, and single pregnancy in a city that thrived on drama. She'd built herself back up with her own hands, refusing to be defined by anyone's cruelty. Now, as she walked into the ballroom on Gabriel's arm, she wasn't just someone's ex-wife or a victim of gossip. She was a survivor, a soon-to-be mother, and the partner of a man who valued her strength. The world saw her as vulnerable, but in truth, Eliza Porter had never been stronger. And that strength, quiet and unshakable, would soon become the force that toppled the arrogant man who once believed he could break her. If you ever wanted to see power, ambition, and old money on full display, there was no better place than the Rosemont Hotel on the night of the Spring Hearts Gala. The city's most influential people gathered under a domed ceiling glittering with thousands of Swarovski crystals. Marble floors reflected the slow swirl of couture gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. Waiters in starched white gloves floated through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with champagne and caviar. Every corner was lit for photos, every moment staged for social media. On this night, reputations could be made or destroyed in a single, viral second. The event was supposed to be about charity. Officially, it raised millions for children's hospitals and scholarships. Unofficially, it was the arena for power games. New ventures whispered over cocktails, murgers hinted at over filet mignon, and grudges settled with a glance. Underneath the polite conversation, everyone was watching everyone else. Whose dress was custom, whose smile was fake, who was winning, and most deliciously, who was losing. When Eliza Porter entered the ballroom, most people didn't even recognize her at first. She wasn't a regular on the charity circuit, and her style was the opposite of flashy. But all it took was one gasp, one whisper. "Is that Eliza Porter?" And the ripples began. Eyes followed her across the floor, some with sympathy, some with open curiosity. On her arm was Gabriel West, the man of the hour, whose presence alone could shift a room's energy. Whispers grew louder as guests realized who they were seeing. Eliza was pregnant, radiant, and with the one man everyone else wanted to meet. Gabriel was a study in quiet power. He wore a charcoal suit so well-tailored it looked effortless, his dark hair brushed back, his expression calm and unreadable. He nodded politely to those he knew, mayors, CEOs, actors, ambassadors, but his hand stayed on Eliza's back, a silent promise of support. Unlike so many of the men in the room, he wasn't there to show off his date. He was there for Eliza. Every gesture said it. The contrast between them and Evan Porter's table could not have been sharper. Evan, desperate to be seen as the king of the party, had gathered a circle of hangers-on and yes men. plus Stella Ray in a gold dress that sparkled with every movement. Their laughter was too loud, their jokes too pointed, and their eyes too often flickered over to Gabriel and Eliza, sizing them up. Evan pretended not to notice, but everyone knew he saw them. The minute Eliza walked in, the temperature of the night changed. The evening's program was a careful choreography of speeches, auctions, and entertainment, but the real drama happened in the spaces between. When the crowd gathered for the live auction, Gabriel and Eliza were swept up in a swirl of introductions. For the first time in months, Eliza found herself at ease. People asked about her pregnancy with genuine interest, complimented her on her courage, and expressed excitement about her relationship with Gabriel. Some of the city's most powerful women, who had always kept their distance before, now smiled at her, welcoming her into the fold. It was as if, just by surviving scandal and heartbreak, Eliza had earned their respect. But all the kindness in the world couldn't erase the tension on the other side of the ballroom. Evan, watching the scene unfold, gripped his glass harder with every minute. He leaned toward Stella, whispering something that made her laugh. Too loud, too sharp, meant to be overheard. "You'd think she'd stay home and rest," Stella said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "I mean, is this really the place for a single mom?" One of Evan's buddies snickered, and a few guests looked away, embarrassed for them. The MC's voice rose over the chatter, announcing a special performance. Lights dimmed, the orchestra played, and for a few minutes, the air softened. Eliza allowed herself to relax, closing her eyes and listening to the music. Gabriel leaned down and whispered, "You're doing amazing. I'm proud of you." It was the simplest thing, but it meant everything. In that moment, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. As the performance ended, the real show began, the charity auction. Evan couldn't resist one last attempt to draw the spotlight. He bid extravagantly on a signed guitar, dramatically outbidding a rival CEO, and then turned to the room for applause. When the applause faded, Evan grabbed the microphone from the auctioneer, ignoring the polite confusion on stage. "I want to make a toast," he announced, raising his glass as all eyes turned his way. Gabriel's jaw tightened, and Eliza's heart skipped a beat. She knew Evan too well. He would never pass up a chance to turn a night about charity into a personal spectacle. Evan launched into a speech about moving on and trading up, peppered with veiled barbs clearly aimed at Eliza and Gabriel. "You know, life's funny," he said, smiling like a shark. "You lose something, but sometimes you end up with something better. Sometimes you end up with exactly what you deserve." Laughter rippled through his table, but the rest of the ballroom was silent, uncomfortable. He didn't stop there. He glanced at Gabriel. "And sometimes a man gets lucky. I mean, who wouldn't want to be a hero to a damsel in distress? That's what the tabloids call it, right? But let's not kid ourselves, folks. Some people are just along for the ride." The cruelty hung in the air, thick as smoke. Stella snickered, squeezing Evan's arm like she was at a comedy show. Eliza felt every eye on her, but she kept her chin high. She remembered her mother's words, "You decide who you become." Next to her, Gabriel squeezed her hand under the table, steady as a rock. Eliza smiled at him, refusing to look away from the crowd. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The lights, the music, the dresses, the money, none of it mattered. What mattered was the truth, and the truth was about to surface. Because what no one knew, what not even Evan realized, was that the night was just beginning. The real fireworks were yet to come, and when they did, the entire city would watch as the tables turned with a force no one saw coming. And in the middle of it all, Eliza Porter, the woman everyone underestimated, was about to become the story they'd never forget. If you asked Evan Porter, he'd say he was the self-made man every guy wanted to be. He'd built a tech startup from nothing, rode the wave of a lucky buyout, and landed in the glossy pages of business magazines before he even turned 35. In his mind, he was the city's golden boy, sharp, ambitious, impossible to ignore. He'd learned early on how to charm a crowd, how to talk his way into closed rooms, and how to make people laugh, even if the jokes were at someone else's expense. But the truth, the part he never admitted to anyone, not even himself, was that Evan was addicted to attention. And as the years went on, he needed bigger doses just to feel alive. Growing up in a nice suburb with a hard-working accountant dad and a stay-at-home mom, Evan had never wanted for much, but he'd always craved more. More respect, more freedom, more of everything his parents told him took patience and humility. He hated waiting his turn. In college, he cut corners and made connections. He could spot opportunity like a bloodhound. If it meant stepping on people, so be it. He called it playing the game. When he met Eliza, he genuinely thought he loved her. She was grounded, kind, a little too earnest. But at the time, that steadiness felt like an anchor, someone to come home to, someone who made him feel safe. But as his tech career took off, the anchor began to feel like a chain. The little apartment he'd once loved now felt cramped. Eliza's simple joys, homemade dinners, thrift store books, afternoons in the park, felt childish compared to the world he was moving into. "Why can't you want more?" he snapped one night after a networking event. "Don't you want to be someone?" Evan started staying out late, always with an excuse, a deal to close, an investor to charm. He'd come home smelling like whiskey and expensive cologne, and if Eliza asked questions, he'd turn the tables. "You're just insecure. If you trusted me, you wouldn't ask." At first, he hid his affairs, but as his ego grew, so did his carelessness. Soon he was parading Stella Ray, his new girlfriend, to every after-party, convinced the world envied his upgrade. He made jokes about his marriage in public, each one sharper than the last. The truth was, Evan's confidence masked a growing fear, that he was an imposter, that his money and charm were all he had. That maybe, underneath it all, he wasn't actually that special. He clung to his new image with both hands, desperate not to slip. That's why Eliza's calm, quiet strength infuriated him. She didn't chase anyone's approval. She never tried to compete. No matter how he tried to rattle her, insults, gaslighting, even the divorce, she held her head high. To Evan, that dignity felt like a rebuke. And so he made it his mission to win every encounter, to prove to the world and himself that he was better off without her. He started rumors about her being lazy, clingy, unstable, anything to justify his choices. When news broke that she was dating Gabriel West, Evan felt his world tilt. Gabriel was everything he wanted to be, respected, private, and truly powerful. Worse, the city's rumor mill spun their relationship as a love story for the ages. A strong woman finds her worth, a good man cherishes her. Evan hated it. At the Rosemont Gala, he saw his chance. With Stella on his arm and his cronies hanging on his every word, he decided to take back control of the narrative. His plan was simple: humiliate Eliza and Gabriel publicly, reclaim his role as the star, and show everyone that he was the one who moved on best. That was why he made the toast, why he hurled those cruel jokes. He wanted to see Eliza break. He wanted to see Gabriel lose his cool. But as the room quieted after his speech, Evan noticed something he hadn't expected. Eliza didn't flinch, Gabriel didn't blink, the room didn't erupt into the applause or laughter Evan craved. Instead, there was a thick, uneasy silence. For the first time, a few people actually looked away from Evan, their expressions embarrassed. A prominent donor whispered to her husband, shaking her head. The MC tried to steer the night back to charity, but the damage was done. Evan had revealed himself as someone desperate, someone cruel. Later in the men's room, one of Evan's friends muttered, "Maybe take it easy, man, that wasn't a good look." Evan shrugged it off, but inside the old panic flared. He'd misjudged the room. He'd overplayed his hand. Still, Evan couldn't admit defeat. At his core, he truly believed that power meant never apologizing, that the loudest voice always won. As the night wore on, he doubled down, making sly digs at Eliza's dress, telling anyone who'd listen that Gabriel was buying her affection, and boasting about his own success post-divorce. His arrogance blinded him to the truth. The people around him were growing tired of his act. Stella, who had once basked in the attention, now looked bored. Her laughs grew brittle. She checked her phone under the table, messaging friends about after-parties. Evan barely noticed. He was too focused on watching Eliza and Gabriel, waiting for them to falter, to give him some sign he'd gotten under their skin. But all he saw was grace. Eliza never raised her voice. Gabriel never rose to the bait. Instead, they moved through the night with quiet confidence, speaking with real friends, laughing with people who cared. And slowly, the tide began to turn. People started drifting toward Eliza and Gabriel, leaving Evan and Stella to stew in their shrinking circle of hangers-on. What Evan didn't realize as he nursed his final drink was that he was setting himself up for a downfall more dramatic than anything he could have imagined. The board members of his company, watching from a distance, were taking note of his behavior. His own lawyer, frowning at the spectacle, texted a warning. "You're trending for all the wrong reasons. Don't say anything else tonight." But it was too late. Evan was already locked in his own story, a story where he was always the winner, no matter the cost. What he didn't see was that the cost was about to become everything he valued most. His job, his image, his carefully crafted empire. Even the loyalty of the woman who'd chosen him when he had nothing. Pride had blinded him, but the world was about to open his eyes. And for the first time in his life, Evan Porter would learn that the loudest man in the room is often the one with the most to lose. If you asked anyone the next day what they remembered most from the Rosemont Gala, it wasn't the money raised, the celebrity guests, or the orchestra's flawless performance. It was the moment when a private humiliation turned into public theater. A scene so raw, so unexpected, that it instantly exploded across social media and gossip sites. It started with a single, sharp sentence delivered into a microphone Evan Porter wasn't supposed to be holding. He'd cut in just after the final auction item, his voice ringing out over the ballroom speakers, echoing off the marble and glass. "Some people just can't let go," he smirked, eyes locked on Eliza and Gabriel. "Guess some women think if they get knocked up, they'll stay relevant." A hush swept the room, the kind that's as loud as a scream. For a split second, no one moved. Gabriel reached for Eliza's hand, his jaw clenched, but she squeezed back, her way of saying, "I can take this." Across the room, cameras and cell phones flashed, capturing not only Evan's words, but the stunned expressions that followed. Stella, realizing the moment was spiraling out of control, giggled weakly, trying to play it off. "Relax, babe," she cooed, loud enough for the nearest table. "It's just a joke, right?" But no one was laughing. A socialite at the next table dropped her fork, mouth open in disbelief. An older donor whispered, "Is he drunk?" And even the band stopped tuning their instruments. The MC, sweating, tried to move things along, but the air wouldn't clear. Evan pushed forward, unable to read the room, thinking he could salvage the moment with more bravado. "I mean, look at me," Evan boasted, pacing like a comic at an open mic gone wrong. "I've got everything I want. My company, my life, a beautiful woman." He gestured at Stella, who offered a tired, forced smile, already regretting being part of the show. "But hey, I get it. Some people need to hold on to the past. Maybe some of us like handouts. Or maybe, just maybe, some people just can't handle that the train left the station and they're not on board." The words hit like a slap. For Eliza, every eye in the room felt like a spotlight. But she refused to shrink. She met Evan's gaze, calm and steady, her spine straight. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. The only thing that flickered in her eyes was a spark of defiance. Gabriel, however, couldn't hide his anger. He stepped forward, his voice measured but icy. "That's enough, Evan," he said, the quiet authority in his tone silencing even the bartenders at the back. "You've made your point. Let's remember why we're here tonight." But Evan wasn't finished. Drunk on attention, adrenaline, and resentment, he leaned in again, lowering his voice just enough to sound menacing. "Careful, Gabriel. Wouldn't want you wasting your time or your fortune on someone who's already used goods." The gasp that swept the room was audible, like the collective exhale of an audience after a magician's trick. Except this wasn't magic. It was cruelty. The MC, desperate, finally managed to cut the mic, stammering about dessert and coffee. But the damage was done. In an era where every phone is a camera and every guest a potential reporter, the video was already being texted, tweeted, and uploaded before Evan made it back to his table. "Evan Porter humiliates pregnant ex at gala," trended before midnight. Instagram stories showed the exact moment Eliza's name became a symbol of both pity and admiration. Some called her a victim, others a survivor. But all agreed on one thing: Evan had crossed a line. As the gala ended, guests avoided Evan's table, offering only awkward smiles or silent glances. Stella made a show of fixing her makeup, then excused herself for the restroom, and didn't come back. Gabriel quietly helped Eliza out of the ballroom, his presence protective but never overbearing. Behind them, the city's elite whispered, shocked at what they'd witnessed. It wasn't just scandal, It was a public shaming that would have real consequences. In the car ride home, Eliza held back tears, determined not to let Evan see her broken. "You don't have to be strong tonight," Gabriel said gently, his hand covering hers. "Not for me, not for anyone, just let it out." But Eliza shook her head. "He doesn't get to see me cry, not anymore." Her voice trembled, but there was steel in her words. She stared out the window, city lights blurring, her mind racing through every insult, every memory of a man she once thought she'd love forever. What neither she nor Gabriel realized was that the fallout had already begun. At that very moment, a video of Evan's tirade was going viral. Board members of his company watched it on their phones, frowning at the PR disaster. Reporters called for comment. Old friends distanced themselves, appalled. For once, Evan's ego had pushed him too far, and now he'd have to answer for it. Not just to Eliza, but to everyone who'd believed in him. Eliza sat in the darkness of her apartment that night, hands on her belly, feeling her baby kick gently, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. She took a shaky breath and let herself cry for the first time in weeks. Not for Evan, but for the years she'd wasted doubting her own worth. She cried for every woman who'd ever been humiliated, overlooked, or discarded. Then, just as quickly, she wiped her face, squared her shoulders, and started to plan. Because this was not the end of her story. If Evan thought he'd written the last chapter, he was about to learn that the real heroine never lets anyone else hold the pen. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, not just for Evan, but for everyone who ever believed a woman's strength depended on a man's approval. Eliza was done playing the victim. She was ready to fight. And as the city gossiped, tweeted, and judged, no one could imagine just how far she and Gabriel would go to set things right. When Eliza Porter stepped out of the Rosemont Hotel and into the thick, humid night, she was no longer the calm, collected woman the city had seen inside the ballroom. She felt hollow. Each footstep echoed with humiliation. Every camera flash outside burned like a spotlight on her shame. She squeezed Gabriel's hand as they climbed into his waiting car, but she felt herself drifting, untethered and numb, her mind swirling with every cruel word Evan had hurled at her. Even as the doors closed behind them, she could hear the laughter, the gasps, the barely concealed shock. She knew the entire city would be reliving her worst moment by morning. Gabriel sat quietly at her side, not pressing, not speaking, just there, a steady presence in the storm. As the car wound through downtown's midnight streets, Eliza stared blankly at the blur of lights. Her phone began to buzz, texts, calls, notifications piling up in a cruel digital avalanche, friends who hadn't called in years, a flurry of condolences, and even some messages from strangers. "Hang in there, you're so brave, don't let him win." She scrolled, but the comfort felt empty, like sympathy for a wound that was still bleeding. By the time Gabriel's driver pulled up to her apartment, Eliza's body felt heavy with exhaustion. Gabriel helped her upstairs, and for a long moment, neither spoke. He set a cup of tea in her trembling hands, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Eliza," he said softly, "it's okay to be hurt. You don't have to pretend tonight." The dam inside her finally broke. Her breath caught, and tears spilled down her cheeks, hot, silent, uncontrollable. Gabriel pulled her close, letting her sob against his chest, just holding her while the weight of everything came crashing down. Memories raced through her mind. The night Evan left, her frantic calls he never answered, the morning she found out about his affair, the cold legal letters that followed. She'd built walls around her pain. But now, with nothing left to shield her, it all came pouring out. Betrayal, heartbreak, even guilt for still loving the man he used to be. She thought of the little life growing inside her, the future she'd dreamed of, now rewritten with every headline and viral video. After what felt like hours, the storm of emotions slowed. Eliza pulled back, embarrassed, wiping her face. "I'm sorry, I should be stronger than this." Gabriel's answer was gentle but firm. Strength isn't about never falling apart. It's about putting yourself back together. He left her with that thought, quietly making up a spot for himself on the couch, refusing to leave her alone even when she insisted. "Just rest. I'm right here," he promised. For the first time in weeks, Eliza slept deeply, her dreams haunted but peaceful, her body giving her the release her mind desperately needed. Morning came with a cruel brightness. Sunlight poured through the blinds, forcing Eliza to face the world. Her phone buzzed again. Now, in addition to sympathetic messages, there were cruel comments. Gold digger. Desperate. She's just jealous. Tabloid headlines screamed, Evan Porter's ex humiliated at gala, billionaire fiancé caught in the drama. Eliza turned off her phone, pushing back the wave of panic. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Eyes swollen, hair tangled, hope fading. She tried to go about her day as usual. She fed herself breakfast, showered, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt. She reminded herself she was more than a headline. But every time she closed her eyes, she heard Evan's voice echoing in her mind. For a moment, she wondered if he was right. Was she really just a burden, a mistake, used goods? Was she worth anything at all now that the city had seen her lowest point? Her thoughts spiraled, and by midday, Eliza was on the verge of panic. She called her mother, desperate for a lifeline. Cynthia answered on the first ring, her voice as steady as always. "Honey, I saw what happened. I am so sorry." Eliza let herself cry again, but this time, her mother's voice grounded her. "Don't you dare let that man's words decide who you are. I raised you better than that. You get to choose how this ends, not him." It was the same advice Cynthia had given her as a child, and now it reached through the fog, planting a seed of strength. Still, the sense of despair lingered. That afternoon, Eliza forced herself outside, pulling a hoodie over her face and walking the neighborhood. She wandered aimlessly through the park, unsure of what she was searching for. A group of children ran past, laughing, and she felt a bittersweet ache. Would her child ever be free from the shadow of this scandal? Would she ever be able to walk into a room without people whispering? As evening fell, Gabriel found her on a bench, lost in thought. He sat down beside her, silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why you're still standing, Eliza?" She shook her head. "Because you've survived worse. Because you know who you are, even when other people try to take that from you." His words unlocked something inside her. Eliza realized that surviving public humiliation wasn't about pretending it never happened. It was about refusing to let it define her. They walked home together, and for the first time, Eliza felt the faintest glimmer of hope. That night, she sat by her bedroom window, watching the city lights. She opened a notebook and wrote the first words she'd let herself write in weeks. "I am not broken. I am not what he says. I am more." She promised herself, and her unborn child, that she would fight, not just to survive but to reclaim her story. What Eliza didn't know was that even as she found her resolve, a storm was brewing on the horizon. The seeds of Evan's downfall had already been planted. Gabriel, quiet and patient, had set things in motion that would change all of their lives. In her darkest hour, Eliza had no idea that her greatest comeback was already on its way. And when the dawn finally broke, it would bring not more shame, but the first steps toward a future no one, least of all Evan, could ever take away from her. Morning in the city dawned crisp and cloudless, but for Eliza, everything still felt gray and raw. She forced herself through the motions, a shower, oatmeal, her prenatal vitamins, determined to act normal even as the world kept replaying her humiliation. As she finished dressing, there was a soft knock at the door. Gabriel stood on the threshold, holding 2 cups of coffee and a small pastry bag. "Didn't know what you'd be able to keep down, so I brought options," he said, the tiniest smile tugging at his lips. Eliza let him in, grateful for the normalcy, for his quiet way of never pushing, never pitying. He set the food on the kitchen table and sat across from her. "Before you say anything," he began, "you should know something." He slid a folder toward her. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Eliza blinked, confused, but opened the folder, and the world as she knew it changed. Inside were copies of emails, official letters, and court documents. The first shock was a notarized letter. Gabriel West now owned a controlling share of Evan's tech company, acquired in a secret buyout the previous week. Eliza's hands shook as she read the next page, an internal memo from the company's board of directors formally announcing a review of Evan's conduct due to recent public behavior and violations of the company's ethics policy. Gabriel had not only stepped in as majority shareholder, he'd also given the board permission to act without fear of Evan's retaliation. She looked up, stunned. "How? Why?" Gabriel's eyes were gentle, but his words held the unmistakable tone of power. "Because no one gets to treat you that way. And because you're not the only one Evans ever hurt, his leadership was already in question. I just expedited things. He paused, then added, Eliza, I'm not telling you this to show off or to fight your battles for you. You should always have the power to choose, but sometimes even the strong deserve an ally. Eliza let the words settle in her chest. Her whole life she'd been fighting, first for respect, then for love, then for her own survival. To have someone not just believe in her, but stand up for her on the biggest stage, it felt unreal, overwhelming. Tears pricked at her eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling with relief and gratitude. But the surprises weren't over. Gabriel opened his phone and showed her a flurry of news alerts. The video of Evans' public tirade had gone viral overnight. Hundreds of thousands of views. Commentators, some famous, some not, were speaking out, condemning Evans' cruelty and praising Eliza's composure. What kind of man humiliates the mother of his child? One headline read. Another, pregnant woman stands tall, ex-husband loses control. Even more shocking was what followed. Dozens of women began sharing their own stories of Evans' manipulation, his arrogance, and the toxic culture he fostered at work. Former employees sent anonymous tips to reporters in the company's ethics hotline. Whistleblowers came forward, providing proof of Evans' affairs with subordinates, misuse of funds, and other policy violations. Within hours, the board scheduled an emergency meeting. It wasn't just Evans' job at risk. It was his entire public image, his king-of-the-world persona. The internet had turned, and no amount of charm or PR could put the genie back in the bottle. As Eliza sat with Gabriel, her mind spun with the realization. She wasn't powerless. She had never really been alone. Her dignity, her refusal to stoop to Evans' level, had spoken louder than any insult. And now, with Gabriel's backing, and the city's sympathy, she held more cards than she ever dreamed possible. Later that day, Eliza received a call from a popular daytime talk show. They wanted her to share her side of the story, not as a victim, but as a voice for every woman who'd ever been shamed or doubted. She hesitated, nervous about more exposure. But Gabriel, always steady, reminded her, you decide what happens next. Not Evan, not the tabloids, you. For the first time in months, Eliza felt excitement ripple beneath the fear. That afternoon, she met with a lawyer, one who specialized in workplace retaliation and public defamation. Gabriel had already arranged the meeting, but insisted she only go if she wanted. The lawyer assured Eliza that, given the new evidence and the outpouring of public support, Evans' legal threats were nothing but hot air. In fact, the lawyer said, the company may owe you damages for the way he's tried to drag your name through the mud. For once, the law was on Eliza's side. By early evening, news broke. The company's board had suspended Evan pending investigation. Evan tried to reach out, burst with angry texts, then desperate calls, finally with public statements blaming cancel culture. No one bought it. Stella Ray, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quietly deleted all their photos together from her social media and unfollowed him. His friends stopped replying to his texts. His allies vanished. For a man who'd built his identity on attention, isolation was the harshest punishment of all. Back at her apartment, Eliza stared at the city's sunset, hand resting on her belly. She was tired, yes, but no longer afraid. For so long, her whole life had felt like a storm she just had to survive. Now, for the first time, she felt a shift inside her. Maybe she could do more than just survive. Maybe she could win. Gabriel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders. Whatever you want to do next, I'm with you, he said quietly. You don't need me to fight for you, but I'd be honored to fight with you. Eliza closed her eyes, breathing in the moment. Everything Evan had tried to take from her, her confidence, her future, her hope, was already starting to return. She wasn't broken, she was ready. Tomorrow, she would stand up, and the city would finally see just how powerful a discarded woman could be. For most of her life, Eliza Porter believed that strength was about holding things together, her family, her dignity, her dreams. But as the world finally turned its gaze toward her story, not as a punchline, but as a testimony, she realized that true strength meant letting go of fear and stepping into her own power. The days following the gala scandal unfolded like a movie montage, only this time, Eliza was writing the script. It started with a choice. She could have hidden, waited for the drama to fade and let others speak for her. but every message of support, every stranger's story of surviving humiliation or heartbreak pushed her in another direction. Eliza decided that she would not let the worst night of her life define the rest of it. She would stand up. She would reclaim her story. The first step was simple, but symbolic. She put on her favorite blue dress. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers. Soft, comfortable, and worn in all the right places. She brushed her hair, applied a little mascara, and looked herself in the mirror. For the first time in months, she saw not just a survivor, but a woman on the edge of something new. Her phone rang with a call from the talk show producer. "Eliza, are you ready?" The world wanted her voice, not as Evan's ex-wife, not as the woman who got humiliated, but as herself. She hesitated, but only for a moment. "Yes," she said, "let's do it." When she arrived at the studio, she was met by a team of stylists, producers, and a warm maternal host. "We want you to feel safe and strong," the host said, squeezing her hand. The show's theme, Women Who Refuse to Be Broken. The interview aired live, reaching millions. Eliza spoke with honesty, her voice steady but never bitter. She didn't attack Evan, she didn't have to. She simply told the truth, how it feels to have your life unravel in public, how hard it is to keep going when people expect you to collapse. "You don't have to be perfect or unbreakable to survive," she told the audience. "You just have to believe you're worth saving. And sometimes, surviving is the bravest thing you can do." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Social media exploded with messages of solidarity. Women and men shared their own stories, tagging Eliza and using the hashtag #StandTall. A well-known businesswoman messaged her privately, "If you ever want to return to teaching, my foundation will support you. If you want to start something new, I'll help fund it." Eliza was stunned. All her life, she'd believed that standing out meant being vulnerable. Now she saw it for what it was, a gift. With Gabriel's encouragement, Eliza did something she'd always dreamed of. She created a non-profit foundation, Hope Rises, dedicated to helping women and families recover from public shame and start over. Using her own experience, she developed workshops on self-worth, legal resources, and resilience. Donations poured in, not just from celebrities and philanthropists, but from regular people who'd seen themselves in her journey. At home, Eliza's transformation was just as real. She changed her space, clearing out everything that reminded her of Evan or the woman she'd been when she married him. She filled her apartment with fresh flowers, new books, and art from local women artists. She redecorated the nursery, painting it a bright, hopeful yellow and hanging little paper cranes for peace. Her friends visited, bringing laughter and support. Her mother came over every weekend, holding Eliza's hand and marveling at her newfound confidence. But the change wasn't just on the surface. Inside, Eliza felt a shift she'd never imagined. She started therapy, not to erase the pain, but to understand it. She learned to set boundaries, not just with Evan, but with anyone who tried to undermine her value. She took walks every morning, feeling her baby kick with growing strength, and whispered promises. "You will never doubt your worth. You will always be loved for exactly who you are." Gabriel, always respectful, never pushed her to move faster than she was ready. Their relationship deepened, rooted in honesty and kindness. He shared his own struggles, loneliness, the pressure of success, the wounds that never showed on the outside. They became partners in every sense, cheering each other on, comforting each other through setbacks, dreaming about the future as equals. Meanwhile, the world kept changing. News broke that the board had voted to permanently remove Evan as CEO. Not only that, he was facing a lawsuit for workplace harassment and misuse of funds, with whistleblowers finally feeling safe enough to come forward. His public apology fell flat. People saw through it. Stella Ray gave her own interview, tearfully admitting she'd been manipulated and used. She apologized to Eliza on air for believing Evan's lies. Eliza didn't celebrate Evan's downfall. Instead, she focused on her own new beginnings. She sent Stella a note, wishing her well and hoping she'd find her own peace. She declined interviews that wanted to sensationalize her pain. She accepted the ones that let her help others. Every time someone tried to reduce her to a headline, "Scorned wife gets revenge," she corrected them. "No, I got my life back." One evening, Gabriel took Eliza to dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. As the sun set, painting the skyline in gold and pink, he raised a toast. To starting over, to never letting anyone else write your story. Eliza smiled, heart swelling with hope. For the first time, she believed in happy endings, not the fairy tales, but the kind you build for yourself, brick by brick, day by day. As the night breeze danced around them, Eliza realized her transformation was about more than survival. It was about living fully, without apology or fear. It was about knowing her worth, not just in the eyes of others, but in her own. And it was only the beginning. In every classic drama, there comes a moment when the tables turn so completely, it leaves everyone breathless. For Evan Porter, that moment arrived like a hurricane, and the world watched as everything he'd clung to slipped away, piece by piece. It began with a boardroom filled with people who used to call him boss. The morning after his public meltdown at the gala, the office was abuzz, not with the usual nervous anticipation of a Monday, but with whispers, pointed glances, and the unmistakable air of impending change. Even before Evan arrived, everyone had seen the viral video. Laptops were open to news sites, phones buzzed with group texts, and the staff who had once tiptoed around his mood swings now openly traded rumors about his fate. Evan strode in, head held high, trying to project the same confidence he'd always relied on. But the eyes that met him were cold, almost pitying. Stella was nowhere to be seen. His trusted allies, board members, longtime friends, suddenly found urgent business elsewhere. The receptionist, who used to laugh at his jokes, barely managed a tight-lipped greeting. For the first time in his career, Evan felt invisible in his own kingdom. Minutes later, he was summoned to the boardroom. Waiting inside were the board of directors, a company lawyer, and, shockingly, Gabriel West, sitting calmly at the head of the table. The room was silent as the lead director spoke. Evan, in light of recent events and evidence provided by multiple sources, this board is voting to remove you as CEO of Porter Tech, effective immediately. She slid a folder across the table, thick with documentation. Videos, emails, affidavits from employees, and, most damning of all, a legal complaint for harassment and breach of contract. Evan tried to bluster his way out. He threatened lawsuits, accused the board of betrayal, ranted about cancel culture. But it was useless. The facts were undeniable, and Gabriel's majority shareholding made the decision airtight. "You brought this on yourself," Gabriel said quietly, his voice steady. "This company deserves better. These people deserve better." With that, it was over. Security was called, and Evan was asked to pack up his office. The news broke within the hour. Porter out as CEO after gala meltdown. News vans camped outside the office, filming as Evan, red-faced and fuming, carried a cardboard box of personal items through the lobby. Someone in the crowd booed. For the first time, the man who had thrived on attention now found himself the target of public scorn. Back at her apartment, Eliza watched the news unfold with a strange mix of emotions. She wasn't gleeful. Instead, she felt a solemn sense of justice, of finally being heard. Friends and strangers texted their congratulations, but she focused on the messages from women at the company, women who told her, "You gave us the courage to speak up." Even as Evan's world fell apart, Eliza refused to let bitterness take root. She knew this moment was bigger than one man's downfall. It was about every person who'd ever been silenced by someone in power. The dominoes kept falling. Stella Ray, facing her own termination for breaching company policy, issued a public apology to Eliza, admitting that she'd let herself be manipulated by Evan. "I thought I was special, that I was different," she said in a tearful interview. "But I was just another name on a long list. I'm sorry, Eliza. I hope you find peace." Eliza, for her part, sent a private message back. "Heal, you are stronger than you think." Evan's other so-called friends quickly distanced themselves. His social media accounts were flooded with angry comments and memes mocking his arrogance. Sponsors pulled out of his pet projects, and even the luxury car company that had once featured him in their ads scrubbed his face from their website. The city's elite, the very people who once scrambled for his approval, now whispered about how quickly he'd fallen. Meanwhile, Gabriel called a staff meeting. He addressed the team not with bluster or bravado, but with humility. "Leadership is not about ego or control," he said. "It's about responsibility to your people, your community, and the truth." He pledged to build a healthier, more respectful culture at Porter Tech, promising that harassment and intimidation would never again be tolerated. The staff, wary at first, gradually warmed to his sincerity. For the first time in years, hope flickered in the office. The media, hungry for a new narrative, shifted their focus to Eliza. Headlines celebrated her not as a victim, but as a woman who'd risen above humiliation and reclaimed her power. She was invited to speak at conferences, to consult on workplace ethics, to mentor young women entering the business world. Her foundation, Hope Rises, received donations from across the country. In one viral clip, she told an audience, "Revenge is not the goal. Accountability is, healing is." Evan, now jobless and abandoned, tried to mount a comeback. He posted rambling videos blaming everyone but himself, but no one listened. He was offered a reality show deal, but even that fell through when advertisers refused to support him. Alone in his expensive condo, Evan finally faced the reality he'd avoided his whole life. He was responsible for his own ruin. The final blow came at a gala, much like the one where he'd mocked Eliza. This time, it was Eliza, accompanied by Gabriel, who was honored for her work in empowering women. As she took the stage, the crowd rose to its feet. She didn't mention Evan. She didn't have to. Her presence, her strength, her refusal to be broken, those were her real revenge. As the evening wound down, Eliza and Gabriel stood together on the balcony overlooking the city. He squeezed her hand, pride shining in his eyes. "You did this," he said. "You changed everything." Eliza looked out at the glittering skyline, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "No," she said quietly, "we did this. Everyone who ever refused to stay silent, everyone who ever chose hope over fear. This is for them." And in that moment, it was clear. The age of Evan Porter was over. The future belonged to those brave enough to start again. The city moved on, as cities always do. Headlines changed, new scandals rose and faded, but something about Eliza Porter's story lingered. It wasn't just that she'd survived a public betrayal. It was that she'd refused to let it define her, that she'd used her pain to carve out a new kind of power, not just for herself, but for anyone who'd ever been broken and dared to start again. Months passed. The season changed. Eliza's life blossomed in unexpected ways. Her foundation, Hope Rises, flourished, helping women from all walks of life find courage, resources, and the confidence to step out of the shadows. She spoke at schools and community centers, teaching young girls the value of their own voices. She mentored survivors, sat with them through their darkest nights, and showed them, by example, that wounds do not have to become scars. Gabriel remained by her side, steady as ever. Their love was quieter than the whirlwind romance of her past, but stronger for it. He celebrated her victories and held her through her doubts. They learned together what it meant to truly heal, not by forgetting the past, but by honoring the lessons it brought. They built new traditions, filling their days with laughter, long walks in the park, and dreams for a future unburdened by old pain. One crisp autumn evening, Eliza stood on the rooftop of her building, looking out over the city lights. In her arms was her newborn daughter, Sophia Grace, named for hope and new beginnings. As the baby breathed softly against her chest, Eliza whispered a promise. "You will never be taught to hide. You will grow up believing you are enough, exactly as you are. No one will ever make you feel small in your own story." Tears welled in her eyes, not from sorrow but from gratitude. She'd once thought her heart was broken beyond repair. Now, holding Sophia, she realized it was fuller than ever. She remembered the nights when she thought she wouldn't survive. The loneliness, the fear, the humiliation. She remembered how easy it had been to believe Evan's lies, how tempting it was to let the world decide her worth. And she remembered the moment she chose herself instead, when she stopped asking permission to be strong. Word spread quickly about her strength and grace. News outlets followed up, not to revisit her pain, but to highlight the change she inspired. Stand Tall became more than a hashtag. It became a movement. Women across the country wrote in, "I left my toxic job because of you. I found the courage to end a hurtful relationship. I started over because you showed me it's possible." Eliza replied to every message she could, always with the same message. "You are not alone. Your story matters." Even her relationship with her own mother, Cynthia, deepened. Cynthia, once burdened by her own struggles and regrets, became a regular presence in Eliza's life. They cooked together, laughed over old family photos, and shared the kind of honest conversations they'd never had before. Cynthia held Sophia, her granddaughter, and whispered blessings over her, as if healing the wounds of the past with every gentle touch. As for Evan Porter, his name became a cautionary tale. He drifted from public life, unable to repair the damage his own pride had wrought. He lost not just his company, but his sense of identity. At first, he lashed out, blaming everyone but himself. But eventually, the world lost interest, and Evan was left with only his own choices to keep him company. Eliza didn't wish him ill. She didn't waste energy on revenge or bitterness. She simply let him go, finally, completely, as an act of mercy for them both. The city never forgot the gala, but in time, the story shifted. It was no longer about a scandal or a downfall. It was about a woman who walked through fire and came out shining brighter than before. It was about the people who helped her rise. A mother, a true friend, a man who loved her at her lowest and helped her see her own worth. It was about the courage to rebuild, the power of vulnerability, and the simple but radical act of refusing to give up. On the anniversary of her public humiliation, Eliza returned to the Rosemont Hotel, not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker for the same charity gala. This time, she stood on stage with Sophia in her arms and Gabriel in the front row. The applause was thunderous, but Eliza's message was gentle, her voice strong and steady. I stand here not as someone who is broken, but as someone who learned to heal. To every woman who's ever been shamed, doubted, or underestimated, let me say this. You are not weak for feeling pain or for wanting more. You are not less for loving, for forgiving, or starting over. Your scars are not your story. They are the proof that you survived. You do not need permission to be powerful. Stand tall, speak your truth, and know that your worth cannot be given or taken by anyone else. The room rose to its feet, and for the first time, Eliza felt completely at home in her own life. She knew there would be hard days ahead, new challenges, new wounds. But she also knew she could face them, not alone, but as part of a community of survivors and believers. People who refused to stay small. As she left the gala that night, the city lights reflecting in her daughter's eyes, Eliza whispered one last promise. No matter what happens, we will always choose hope. We will always choose ourselves. And with that, she stepped forward into a future of her own making, unafraid, unbroken, unstoppable. So the story has ended, and our wonderful friends, are you still here until now? If you're listening to this moment, I know something in this story must have touched your heart, just as it did mine. Life sometimes hands us moments that feel impossible to rise from, humiliation, betrayal, or deep disappointment. But Eliza's journey shows us a truth. You are never defined by the worst thing that happens to you, but by what you choose to do next. Healing is not the denial of pain, but the gentle acceptance of it and the courage to begin again. In the words of heterodoxism, a wound is a place where light enters. If you are hurting, let this be a reminder. Your scars are not the end of your story. They're proof you survived, and even more, that you can thrive. If you found meaning here, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments, what is the light you're letting in today? Your story matters, and we're here for you.